Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
The National Weather Service.
Good Friday evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 7th of November, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that on Marine VHF, NOAA Weather Radio, the internet at weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391. Find us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube during the day. And after this show, you can get the complete broadcast from our broadcast partner here at alaskapublic.org. You'll find that on the right-hand side of your screen. And of course, if you go to YouTube in the afternoon, NWS Anchorage offers the brief update of the surface weather around Alaska for the next 2 days. You'll see the weekend forecast there right now. So if you like to see that around 4 o'clock, that's a good way to get just a brief idea about what we're going to talk about in Alaska weather tonight. Well, as you may know, there's a very large storm out in the western Bering at this point. That's a little bit of an understatement, but a high wind warning continues there at least until Saturday. Now, this was from earlier when the warning went till 9 o'clock. We've extended that until noon for Saturday now. Early this morning, winds started gusting around 50 miles per hour, and just a little bit after 10 o'clock, the winds made it up to 97 miles per hour. That was a gust, not a sustained wind, and we expect that winds will continue to blow in generally from the south and west now, as winds gust upwards of 80 to 90 miles per hour as the storm continues to shift from its morning position here to more of a south and westerly position in the Bering Sea. So this is from earlier this morning. Here's a look at the warning now. The high wind warning does include the western Aleutians again, and we're looking for those southwesterlies to continue through the night and into tomorrow. In fact, it'll still be ramping up through the late evening hours. As we get into midday tomorrow and the afternoon, the wind should start to diminish for the western chain. It will still be a very strong storm, but the worst of the storm, the most intense point of the storm, will start to weaken, and we'll start to see that storm fill in, or at least begin the process of filling in. There's no way to emphasize that this is really going to be a strong storm through the rest of the weekend, and it will continue to make some pretty serious waves out across the western Bering. So high wind warning continues there. I had a little problem with satellite pictures, so we're going to offer these to you today. They're a little bit more on the basic side, not as pretty without any labels. So try and stay with me here. Here's the west coast of Alaska and the Aleutian chain. And here's the storm. It's pretty easy to pick out. A wide swath of clouds working their way eastward along that boundary, swinging through the central chain earlier this afternoon. The central low pressure system right about here, still across the south and western Bering Sea. Another wave of low pressure is slowly working its way through Haida Gwaii in the West Pacific, and we have another area of low pressure dragging a front right across the north coast of the Gulf, swinging in rain and at times some heavy rain around Kodiak today. We picked up about 0.2 of an inch around Cordova, about the same there in Homer and Kodiak, and it looks like, well, Kodiak picked up about a ½ inch, I should say, and areas around Annette saw as much as 1 inch of rain from that steady southerly flow working into south and eastern parts of Alaska. You can see the clouds are working their way into the interior now across the Yukon Valley and points north. Pretty dry conditions. In fact, a lot of clear sky reports there from the observations around Alaska. But gradually, slowly, surely, the clouds will move in from the west to east and start to rub up a little bit more across the south and western coast. Watch for that to bring an opportunity for rain mixed with snow for areas especially south and west of King Salmon and points east, and northward that probably means snow for more places along the YK Delta. Here's a look at the loop one more time. Our low pressure system here in the Gulf will gradually work its way northward and just kind of sit here and spin for the rest of the weekend. And that's exactly what happens to our storm out in the Bering Sea. The overall track seems to take it into the south and western Bering through the rest of tonight and into tomorrow. It slowly drifts eastward, and then as we go through the rest of the weekend and early next week, it starts to move its way back toward eastern Russia. So at this point, we do not see a threat of this swinging into western Alaska or dropping into the Gulf. It will become more diffuse and weaker with time, and as it does that, it will continue a pretty broad southerly flow through most of mainland Alaska, keeping many areas above normal for temperatures both by day and by night. Here's a look at the surface chart for this afternoon. The 983 millibar low there south of Kodiak Island, the frontal boundary across the north and eastern Gulf Coast. The triple point moving through Haida Gwaii, squeezing out some heavier rainfalls we saw around Annette. Again, those numbers were closer to 1 inch. 944 millibars by late in the afternoon. That storm again still deepening or intensifying as we go through the rest of tonight. The front was swinging its way through places close to Adak and heading for Atka by later tonight. And the front will continue marching north and east as we go into the overnight hours. By tonight, watch for some light snow across south and western Alaska. The wind's probably picking up a little bit around Nunivak Island and the southwestern coast. Don't expect a whole lot of gusts, but the winds will become a little more from the south and southeast with time. Possibilities of some light rain and snow mixing south and west of St. Matthew and the Pribilofs as the front marches northward. And this is about as low as we're predicting it to go right now. 928 millibars. And if you've been tracking this and trying to compare this to the record event that we know about, at least in Dutch Harbor, with the ship anchored there in Dutch Harbor in 1977, I believe that was October, 925 millibars. So will it be the lowest recorded pressure? Well, we haven't recorded this, and we probably won't because most of the fleet is not out there next to this storm. But we'll see what we can do. We'll see how those pressure levels stack up there with satellite telemetry and any instrumentation that might be in the path, or at least somewhat close to the path, as we go through the lowest point of the storm. As we get into Saturday, look for some light rainfall across parts of southeast, maybe some light snow up around Haines and Skagway, especially higher up the highway. Around Prince William Sound, continued chances for rainfall there, rain mixing with snow across coastal areas of Prince William Sound and around Homer into Seward. Now, it may be that in south central the winds could set up just right to keep us in more of a rain or snow shadow effect there. Don't be surprised to run into rain and snow showers though along the hillsides, and if you're going hiking up across some of the higher terrain, or if you're flying into Anchorage, you're going to see some of those scattered snow and rain showers in the region. Most of what you'll see across the interior and the west coast will be clear skies starting to fill in more and more with clouds from west to east. Across coastal areas, a pretty quick changeover from rain and snow to just snow the farther away from the coast that you go. Look for a steady southerly flow running right into the Alaska Peninsula and parts of Kodiak Island as the front moves northward slowly and surely, and the low pressure system already beginning to fill in there. It's at 9:43 by late Saturday afternoon. The central and western chain still dealing with strong south and southwesterly winds. As we get into Sunday, the low continues to fill in at 951 millibars. The occlusion poised and ready to start to fall apart. As all of this air mixes in, the frontal characteristics will fall apart fairly quickly. You'll notice rain and snow marching northward. In fact, places like Nome could be looking at a chance for rain and snow Sunday. South and western sections of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta also looking at rain and snow well into the interior there. Coastal areas a better chance for rainfall. A southerly flow working its way into the north and western Gulf. That means rain for Kodiak Island, rain for Prince William Sound, probably some snow over the higher terrain of the Kenai Peninsula, but it could mean rain and snow for some areas in south central at lower terrain, and scattered light rain showers for southeast as high pressure tries to settle down the weather across the eastern sections of the Gulf. And more clouds for the interior, but it looks like a relatively dry situation for you. Temperatures today mid to upper 40s for most areas in southern parts of southeast, lower 40s up north, 40 in Yakutat, Prince William Sound in the upper 30s and lower 40s today. Middleton Island a mild 48, 38 in Kenai, 34 in Anchorage, Squintna, and around Talkeetna temperatures there in the upper 20s and lower 30s, 10 in Glen Allen. Looks like 20 in Northway, 18 in Eagle, 15 around Fairbanks this afternoon, 14 in Healy, and Fort Greely was a considerably warmer 21. 5 in Fort Yukon this afternoon, 8 below just across the border in Old Crow, 5 degrees in Anaktuvuk Pass. Around the Arctic Village region, we're still missing data thanks to the power outage there. It looks like temperatures were still in the single digits to maybe about 5 above around Kaktovik, 3 below around Barrow. Low to mid-teens for most of Kotzebue Sound. You'll be looking at an offshore flow through most of the weekend, so no major concerns for you considering the storm. 24 around Nome, 25 in Unalakleet, Grayling in the mid-teens, 12 in McGrath. South and western Alaska is in the lower to mid-20s around Bethel, to 30s and 40s as you get into Bristol Bay. King Salmon very warm at 46. 30s and 40s for the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint 43. Cold Bay and False Pass closer to 40 degrees. The Central Chain and Shemya in the lower 40s by late afternoon, and St. Paul and St. George both close to 40 degrees. Overnight lows will drop well below zero again for the interior. With that clear sky and dry air, you're not going to hold on to much heat. 5 to 15 below there from Fort Yukon, Arctic Village, to about Fairbanks where you'll be about 2 above. Southeastern Alaska in the upper 30s to lower 40s, most coastal areas at least above the 40 degree mark. Prince William Sound in the mid-30s, South Central also in the lower 30s, close to 40 in Kodiak. Southwest Alaska in the teens and 20s. Nome, you're looking at 19. Kotzebue Sound in the low to mid-teens. And the Aleutians closer to 40 degrees. Same goes for the Alaska Peninsula. Mid-40s for the afternoon, 44 in Kodiak, mid to upper 40s. In fact, some areas approaching 50 close to southeastern Alaska. Mid to upper 40s for Prince William Sound, and South Central is expecting temperatures closer to the upper 30s, even lower 40s for some. In the interior, teens and 20s, including Fairbanks, Fort Greely, and Healy, 22 in Eagle. 4 in Fort Yukon, Kotzebue Sound in the teens and 20s, and the Arctic coast in the single digits, some areas above 10 degrees, like Kaktovik. Flying weather includes a wide area of IFR, but mainly closer to the hilltops and eastern sections of southeast and in the north around Haines and Skagway, running the coast to Yakutat and around some of the higher terrain for Prince William Sound. Otherwise, MVFR should be predominant through south central, the Kenai Peninsula, and most of southeastern Alaska and in through the Matanuska and parts of the Susitna Valleys. Across the west, mainly southwestern Alaska and the Kuskokwim Delta is looking at MVFR and IFR conditions there, and north of St. Matthew to Nunivak Island and parts of the YK coast, generally south of Hooper Bay. And MVFR will continue for the central and western chain, of course. So let's take a look at your pass conditions. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass are both expected to be VFR for your Saturday. However, Lake Clark and Merrill Pass should be at IFR through most of the afternoon. Rainy Pass is expected to be MVFR, as is Windy Pass through the day. And scattered snow showers are possible through Isabel Pass with MVFR there. Mentasta Pass, VFR conditions should prevail. Tanita Pass should be at marginal restrictions through the day. And Portage Pass with rain and snow at elevation, we expect IFR through most of the day, as well as Chilkoot and White Pass with similar conditions. Here's a look at the freezing levels, and you'll notice that warm air is starting to overrun the Kuskokwim and lower Yukon Valley there, with warmer air south of Haida Gwaii between 6,000 and 10,000 foot for the freezing levels there, and some warmer air south of Dutch Harbor and Unalaska, and a little bubble of warmer air out across south and western sections of the Bering Sea wrapped around that area of low pressure. Tomorrow's icing potential right now does not look to be too extreme. There will be a light to isolated moderate across the central and western chain. It's pretty high up there, though. North of St. Lawrence Island and some scattered areas across southwestern Alaska, you'll start to develop some icing potential above 7,000 feet. Same goes for parts of southeastern Alaska. More of a concern will be the turbulence. We'll take a top-down look with low pressure across the southwestern Bering. You see a very fast ribbon of air moving through at around 30,000 feet south of the Aleutian chain. Those wind speeds have been upwards of 175 to 200 knots. They're slowing down just a little bit, but still going full throttle. You'll notice south and southeasterly winds wrapping over the west coast at 70 knots, and a pretty strong jet across northern sections of the Arctic, and a southwesterly wind feeding into southeastern Alaska. All of that is keeping that storm churning and keeping activity going into southeastern Alaska. Wind speeds are diminishing, though, across the eastern Gulf at 9,000 feet, 40 to 45 knots there from the south and west. A broad southerly flow will be the rule for many days to come, probably well into next week at 9,000 feet. Look for those winds between 10 and 30 knots. And out across the west, wind speeds ramp up quickly from 35 to 50, even 70 knots south and west of Shemya and Kiska. At 3,000 feet, we see similar conditions there, anywhere from 30, 40, 70 knots wrapping around that low. The wind's starting to pick up a little bit across the YK Delta, 20 to 40 knots there, right across Nunivak Island and places near Newtok and Hooper Bay and south of Bethel. As you get out around the Kenai Peninsula and Kodiak Island, wind speeds to the south around 50 to 60 knots. They slow down considerably over land to about 10 knots, and south and southwesterly winds will continue over southeastern Alaska at 3,000 feet for Saturday. So turbulence, obviously we're going to watch areas out in the west. Any flights heading westward from Adak or Akka are going to run into some chop, probably a lot more than that. Below 10,000 feet are trouble spots there, and then right along that frontal boundary and just north, you can expect at least occasional moderate and probably some occasional severe there as you approach western Russia. Most areas, though, across the lower and middle Yukon Valley will start to see some light to isolated moderate throughout the day. Around Portage Pass in the northern Kenai Peninsula, watch for some chop. In areas along the Alaska Peninsula and south and west of Kodiak below 5,000 feet, we'll start to see more and more turbulence throughout your Saturday. Southeast, most of your issues will be well to your south. Annette and Ketchikan will be right there on the fringe below 5,000 feet. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with your marine weather here in just a few minutes.
Good evening. I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of the Alaska Public Media and the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation, welcome to Hangar Flying. This evening, our guest is Kerry Long. Kerry was on last time. He's been He is the regional administrator for the FAA, been in his job about 3 months, and he shared with us not only his thrill of being up here in Alaska, but also his passion for aviation safety. So it's nice to have him back with us and talk about some of the things he's seen in the first 3 months with the FAA. Welcome back.
Thank you, Harry.
Kerry, you talked about safety. You talked about the incredible record that we experienced in FY14. And I'd like to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the things you've seen in your first 3 months in office.
Certainly. Thank you, Harry. I know your listeners and viewers know this, but you're a legend. You're a legend, and it's a pleasure to be in the company of a legend. These safety statistics that are so good are because not just people like you, but because you make it your business to be about aviation safety. But in terms of some of the things that that I am focused on here, it's obviously a next generation air transportation system, which promises to make the skies safer, promises to get us set for the future with additional air traffic. And part of that process up in Alaska is happily being a part of the process of introducing the unmanned aerial systems safely into the national airspace system. As you well know, Alaska, through the University of Alaska at Fairbanks, is a test site for one of 6 test sites for the unmanned aerial systems in the country, and Alaska is the first state to, sometimes I do think it's a country, the first state to permit commercial flying of the UAS in 2 instances up in the North Slope. The safe introduction, some people think it's a Wright brothers moment with the UAS and its introduction into the airspace system. And I'd like to think, I know we won't do it unless we do it safely. And I'd like to reassure the pilots who think they're going to lose airspace to these newfangled things that that's not going to happen. We're going to be safe about it. We're going to make sure that the country continues to be the freest place for aviation to operate in the world. And we're just going to make sure that UAS gets the ability and maintains the ability to see and avoid in various ways. Aviation safety is a culture, as you know better than I do, Harry, and these statistics show that places like the Millennium Foundation and so many of the safety organizations in the state are doing the job day in, day out, morning and night to impress upon the pilots the need to fly safely. The weather cam system, the weather cameras that 221 sites, over 800 cameras that the FAA maintains up here, the only state that has weather cameras, and a website that to boot, just have to Google Weather Cameras Alaska to see it, and that all the pilots that I talk to know it and love it, and it's getting better. November 10, it's coming out in a refreshed state. All of these things contribute to the safety culture up here, which is essential because of the difficulty of flying up here, but it's also grasped what I call the Alaska solution. People knew they had to get better. They were the test site for Capstone and ADS-B, and have just done tremendous things in aviation safety. And I'm privileged to be up here as a part of the next stage.
Well, I've got to tell you, Kerry, every time I talk to you, I'm impressed with your philosophy, your thoughts, and it's great to have you at the helm of the FAA up here. And as I've said before, it's a great group of professionals. It's nice to know that you're going to lead them forward and have become a citizen of Alaska. So,
thank you.
I am going to take exception to what you said. It's kind of you to use the word legend, but my predecessor on this show was a legend. That was Tom Wardley. I learned so much from Tom and the people like him out there. But truly, my heart is in aviation safety, as is yours, and it's wonderful to have you on the program tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to mention a couple things. The Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation is member funded, and we're into November, and I would ask you to renew your membership for 2015. We'll be coming out with the membership renewal letters. If you're not already a member, go to our website, www. Help me out here, John. AASFonline.org. We just changed that not too long ago. But go online, sign up. We can keep programs like this coming. Also, I want to remind you again that on November 15th, which is right around the corner, we are going to have the Fall Safety Seminar. We've got two very distinguished aviation experts coming up from the lower 48. We're going to be talking about winter coming and using VFR flight rules to fly into IMC and the dangers thereof. 8:30 to 4:30, November 15th, Lusac Library. Hope to see you there, and in the meantime, fly safe.
Thanks a lot, Harry. As fast as we've seen ice grow across the western coast of Alaska, we'll probably see a lot of that slush out and erode fairly quickly. Whether the winds are becoming southeasterly, we're going to see that move off the coast and probably melt fairly quickly as we get into the weekend here. So a lot of folks are going to see some coastal changes where you're seeing a lot more wind along your coast, especially in that south and easterly flow. Now for some offshore areas, you might see some of that break up across Kotzebue Sound as well. So remember, it's that time of the year where a lot can still change, and with a powerful storm in the western Bering, do expect some of those changes to occur this weekend. Weather.gov/Anchorage/ice.php for the latest outlook and sea ice conditions in your area. For southeastern Alaska, winds will be fairly light in the Lynn Canals. Around southerly winds 10 knots or so, 2-foot seas are expected. Southeasterlies a little bit further south into Frederick Sound and Stevens Passage, 15 knots around Clarence Strait with a 15-knot wind there from the south and east. Generally, that brings us up to about 3 feet. Southerly flow from Craig up to Sitka and all the way north of Gustavus to Yakutat, looking at 15 to 20-knot winds with 13 to 14-foot seas on Saturday, becoming a little bit more onshore as we get into Sunday. Light southwesterlies moving into the northern entrances, westerly flow coming into Port Alexander and areas around Sitka, northwesterlies coming into the Dixon entrance, and northerly flow coming down the inner waterways. 10 to 15 knots, 2 to 3-foot seas on the inside, and 8 to 10-foot seas on the coastal areas with a southeast flow outside of Yakutat up to 25 knots. For south central, an easterly flow inside of Prince William Sound, seas up to 4 to 6 feet with southeasterlies across the north and western Gulf, southwesterly flow east of Kodiak Island, and northerlies coming down Cook Inlet 20 to 25 knots. That should produce 6 to 7-foot seas on Saturday. The winds will pick up a little bit more in the north and western Gulf. In fact, some areas upwards of 35 to 40 knots sustained. 15 to 18-foot seas are expected, and some of those winds also making it west of the Barrens with a 40-knot wind there at 17 feet. Look for 25 to 30-knot winds over Kodiak Island, 13-foot seas on the eastern side of Kodiak Island. Southeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound, and an easterly wind inside of the northern Cook Inlet region, 20 knots with a 6-foot sea on Sunday. Southerlies are working over the Alaska Peninsula tomorrow up to 40 knots in most areas. One exception would be right inside of Bristol Bay with a 30-knot wind from the south and east and a 6-foot sea. By Sunday, everyone's gone southerly. The strongest winds will be from Castle Cape to Chignik with 40-knot winds, 18-foot seas there, and 16-foot seas down the coast toward Sand Point and King Cove. Southerlies inside of Bristol Bay continue, 20-knot winds there with a 7-foot sea and 14-foot seas there north of Cold Bay. Across the Aleutians now, across the west is where we're going to find our biggest problems. 50 to 60-knot winds tomorrow. As we head through tonight, expect southwesterlies up to 70 knots and seas running around 45 feet. That will diminish through the daytime tomorrow, but primarily after the noon hour. So expect big changes to begin by midday and late day tomorrow. This will happen probably in the afternoon. 50 to 60 knots there in the west with 32-foot seas around Kiska. South into the Pacific there, you're looking at 39 to 44-foot seas, and certainly some higher gusts in the region. For Adak and Atka on either side, 35 to 40-knot winds from the south and west, and we'll expect 30 to 40-knot winds to continue for Nikolsky and Unalaska, 14 to 19-foot seas in the Bering, and 13 to 20-foot seas there across the Pacific. By Sunday, a westerly flow continues to be strong across the west and west central parts of the Aleutians. 45-knot winds there for the central areas, 35 knots coming over from the south, 19-foot seas north of Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, and southwesterlies are picking up a little bit more in the Pacific, 40 to 50 knots there from Adak out toward Nikolsky. 26 to 32-foot seas are expected there by Sunday afternoon. As we look at the west coast, look for southeasterlies to pick up from Macouriak all the way up towards St. Lawrence Island. 40-knot winds there with 10 to 11-foot seas. Easterlies coming across St. Matthew with a 22-foot sea. Westerlies across St. Paul and St. George. 15-foot seas are expected there. And freezing spray close to the ice edge, so watch for that. Watch for some changes in the ice as we head through Sunday. Southeasterlies continue for you across the Kuskokwim Bay and north of Nunivak Island with 30 to 35-knot winds. Easterlies working offshore from Mamaroneck and south of St. Lawrence Island. Look for a 14-foot sea. Southerlies across the Pribilovs, a 20-foot sea is expected there on a 35-knot wind. At St. Matthew Island waters looking at 30 knots from the east with a 19-foot sea. Across the Arctic coast, the strongest winds will be at around Kaktovik. A steady southeasterly flow is expected there. Otherwise, 10 knots from Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse to Barrow, and also offshore flow all the way from Wainwright through Kotzebue Sound. 20 to 25-knot winds from the east with a 3 to 5-foot sea. For Sunday, the winds diminish north of Kaktovik, and that'll keep those winds around 10 knots or so from the east, 15 knots north of Barrow, and 20 to 30 knots from Wainwright all the way down to Kivalina and Kotzebue Sound with 4 to as high as 8-foot seas outside of Kotzebue Sound. Recapping tonight's weather, a powerful and dangerous low-pressure system across the south and western Bering Sea is expected to drop to about 928 millibars. That's going to keep southwesterly winds up around 70 knots in the coastal and offshore areas and seas approaching 45 feet. A high wind warning continues for the west and the western sections of the Aleutians. Those winds could gust upwards of 80 to 90 miles per hour through the night and through at least about noon tomorrow. After that, we should start to see diminishing wind and diminishing waves across some of the western Bering Sea coast. Frontal boundaries sweeping through the Aleutians tonight. Ahead of that, there could be rain and snow mix for parts of the Alaska Peninsula and the southwestern coast. Most areas in the interior will be dry, save for southwestern areas. It could be some light snow there, especially in southwestern Alaska. Southeastern Alaska is looking for some light rain, but a steady southerly flow coming into Kodiak Island and the northern Gulf Coast will pick up the rainfall as we head into Sunday, and more rains expected for the Chain and the Alaska Peninsula. Have a good and safe weekend.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.